never seen you looking so gorgeous as you did tonight. I've never seen you shine so bright. You were amazing. Never seen so many people want to be there by your side. And when you turned to me and smiled, it took my breath away. Never will forget the way you look tonight.
She had been divorced a year. She'd found new happiness, new love, and it showed. Last summer, after enjoying the sunshine of the Mediterranean, Diana, Princess of Wales, arrived in Paris and dined with Dodi Fayed at the Ritz Hotel. He'd been to a jeweller's nearby and bought her a $200,000 ring. Were they planning to get married? We would never know.
We have reports from Paris that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car accident and that her partner, Dodi Fayed, has also been killed.
This is CNN breaking news. Developments out of Paris, where Princess Diana has been seriously injured in a car.
こんばんは。こんばんは。イギリスのダイアナ元皇太子、深夜のパリ中心部。
La princesse de Galles, Lady Di, est morte cette nuit à Paris dans un accident.
Nothing could have prepared us for such a shocking end to Diana's life. It was the most unbelievable news.
Princess
No,
Diana
don't
died?
believe that one.
No way.
No, don't
That's
believe
unbelievable.
So completely shocked. I couldn't believe it. It was just, I woke up and it was like, wasn't happening.
Is this for real?
Tragic.
Oh, God. It's a bit shocking. My mother told me when I phoned her to tell her I was home, and I still can't believe it. Can't believe it.
Where were you? How did you hear? None of us surely will ever forget the moment we found out. For me, it was a phone call in the early hours of Sunday, August the 31st, bringing me here to the ITN studios to begin a week of reporting the saddest and most remarkable developments I've ever dealt with. A week when the world seemed to stand still. Since then, the hundreds of letters and messages I've received are to me vivid reminders of how so many people were affected in so many ways. But why were they affected? Even people who did not consider themselves fans of the princess shed some tears. The truth is, it had always been difficult to be indifferent to Diana. Almost anyone who married the Prince of Wales would be the object of intense interest during her life. She was also beautiful, highly photogenic. She was a superstar. She had been a royal, but not a remote one. She had more of the common touch than the rest of the House of Windsor. Those she met found her easy to talk to. People could relate to her. And never more so than when her shortcomings, failings and sufferings were evident. We got to know that she'd been desperate enough to consider suicide, a complicated, all too human person.
An impressive generation of business leaders. I am proud that British companies provided the technology to assist your development.
On the other hand, she was privileged in a way that few can dream of. She could be careless of the feelings of others, especially those she counted as friends, and some of those who worked for her. Whatever was thought of her, one thing was obvious. William and Harry, her beloved sons, had suffered irreplaceable loss. They were the sons she desperately wanted to have as normal an upbringing as possible. In August, they'd been on holiday at Balmoral with their father, in the splendid surroundings of the huge royal estate on Deeside. The first information to reach Balmoral that Diana's companion Dodi fired and their driver were dead, the Princess injured, was received by Robin Janvrin, the Queen's Deputy Private Secretary, the most senior royal aide present. Having been woken and told, Charles and his mother and father watched the television to try to find out more. Janvrin passed on word of the Princess's death at about 3 a.m. Charles roused William and Harry around dawn to tell them the heartbreaking news. The world learned of her death at the hospital in Paris, where doctors had struggled in vain to save the life of the princess.
When she arrived at the hospital, she was already suffering hemorrhaging in the thorax. Then she suffered a stroke. The lung vein was badly injured, despite the care and the heart massage, which was administered for 2 hours.
At home in Cape Town, her brother Earl Spencer told South African radio how in the early hours of Sunday he phoned his sister Jane. Her husband's the Queen's most senior advisor.
He had a second line in his house, and as I was talking to my middle sister Jane, I heard him go, "Oh no." And that's when I knew the tragic news. She'd died.
Around the globe, people tried to comprehend what had happened. From the newsstands of America to the streets of Japan, where there were special free editions of newspapers reporting Diana's death. Universally, they began to lay flowers, from the steps of the British Embassy in Washington to the gates of Sandringham Estate in Norfolk, where Diana lived as a small child. But it was the palaces of London that quickly became the focus of grief. So many needed to express it publicly. A few bouquets at first, thousands would follow.
Oh, Mr. Shapkin was so...
She's been a great inspiration to me, and I'm sure she's been a great inspiration to women all over the world, and I just felt this was the time to come and say goodbye to her.
It's just like I felt that I've known her as a friend, and I felt for her children.
Very sad. I mean, flags at half-mast everywhere, and people's hearts at half-mast as well, I think, really, you know.
Everyone realises it, and you don't know what you've lost until it happens.
The first flowers were laid at Kensington Palace, Diana's home, at 6 o'clock that morning.
We stopped at an all-night garage and bought some flowers. I bought a little yellow plant, and we went straight to Kensington Palace. And I'd often seen her drive in the gates or out of the gates, and I half expected her to come out in her gym things on her way to the gym, like you see on the television so often. But slowly, as people began to arrive, and there were a lot of people crying, you realised, well, it was true. It was very hard to take in.
There's been a catharsis of emotion, that if I'm right, that she represented for different people different things, then her death represents the death of those things. So if people are tuning in to Diana, the healing figure, or the intuitive friend of the down and out, then that is Di.
Here he is. Tony Blair had been in office for a day under 4 months. A young Prime Minister leading a new government facing the most extraordinary challenge. Blair, on his way to church in his County Durham constituency, knew he'd always be judged by what he would say at this moment.
The people everywhere, not just here in Britain, everywhere, they kept faith with Princess Diana. They liked her, they loved her. They regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess. And that's how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
The people's princess, the way Diana would be described over and over again. Tony Blair had spoken of his feelings, and the widespread view was he'd been right to do so. But the thoughts and feelings of the royals up in Scotland stayed largely hidden. The first public view of the family came as they drove the few hundred yards from Balmoral to Crathy Church. William and Harry were among them, duty being done the royal way, yet this stiff parade seemed wrong. The monarchy seemed in grave danger of misreading the nation's mood at the start of the Crown's most difficult week since the abdication. During the Crathie service, the princess wasn't even mentioned. And amid the grief at the palace gates, anger. The first reports from Paris had talked of paparazzi, freelance photographers, chasing the doomed princess in her speeding car. The media was getting the blame.
Why did they pay so much money for the photographs? Why were the paparazzi after them? If there was no money in the photographs, they wouldn't have been after her in the tunnel. She's allowed to lie. She's allowed to lie.
Of course,
and they took it. They have taken it.
Okay.
They've taken her life.
Everybody is at fault. Everybody is at fault.
Well, I wouldn't buy the Sun. I wouldn't even buy the Sun for the toilet paper.
It is. It's your fault. It's your fault. It's not my fault.
It's the public's fault. I wouldn't buy the.
In South Africa, Earl Spencer emerged from his home.
Good morning. I'm just going to read this statement. This is not a time for recriminations, but for sadness. However, I would say that I always believed the press would kill her in the end. But not even I could imagine that they would take such a direct hand in her death, as seems to be the case. It would appear that every proprietor and editor of every publication that has paid for intrusive and exploitative photographs of her, encouraging greedy and ruthless individuals to risk everything in pursuit of Diana's image, has blood on his hands today.
As the Earl's words reverberated, Prince Charles left Balmoral for Paris to bring the body of Diana home. Whatever his former wife's official status, she'd lost the style Her Royal Highness when they divorced, Charles decided straight away that in death she needed to be treated as royal. He saw it as his duty. He was no longer her next of kin, but she was the mother of his sons. Indeed, there was little or no hostility between them when it came to the children. The sense of shock in France was as great as anything this side of the Channel. Waiting on the steps of the hospital was the French president with words of condolence. For many of those watching, reality hit with the first sight of the coffin, covered by a royal standard which Charles himself had brought from Britain. The prince, Diana's sisters with him, thanked the hospital staff for what they tried to do. Applause, the continental way of sharing grief and declaring appreciation of the dead, would soon be heard on the streets of London too. The coffin was taken to a Paris airbase for the short flight across the Channel. Who could ever have imagined that the Princess of Wales would return like this? she was carried by RAF servicemen at the military airfield at Northolt on a breezy, sunny evening. Diana was left in the care of the royal funeral directors Levertons. Prince Charles headed back to Scotland to be with his boys again at the end of an impossibly difficult day. Diana's body was taken to lie alone in the Chapel Royal of St. James's Palace. It was a place she never liked, the London home of her ex-husband. Through tall leaded windows, just the glimpse of a lamp. There was no public lying in state. Her home, Kensington Palace, was turning fast into a shrine, the focus of mass emotion the likes of which Britain had never experienced. The tributes to the People's Princess would eventually spread out into a deep carpet of messages, presents, and many, many flowers. It was to Kensington Palace that I came at the end of that first day, having spent most of it in ITN studios. There was already a large and mostly silent crowd streaming towards those golden gates. I found it hard to understand, frankly, why so many had come. Then people began talking to me, and I had my first inkling that something very unusual was going on, of what a very painful few days we were about to go through. No one talked of a week of official mourning, but it began to happen anyway. Everywhere life slowed down, paused to remember her.
Princess Diana has touched the hearts of men, women and children throughout the world. And she's touched many hearts here in Oldham.
May we ask you to stand for a moment of silence to remember the tragic and untimely death of Diana, Princess of Wales. We extend to their families and the people of Great Britain our sincere condolences.
Under these dreadful, tragic circumstances, I want you, please, to stand with me and observe 1 minute's silence and take your headdress off, please. Thank you.
It's to make us thoughtful this morning, because we have some very sad news that we share.
We've lost the woman that cared about people and who loved the people and just helped them.
She helped the poor and she helped the people that were disabled.
British sport halted. Football matches were called off.
I ask you all to raise and to observe 1 minute silence in memory of Diana, Princess of Wales.
In London, Harrods went dark. Its owner, Dodi's father, Mohammed Al Fayed, ordered that the 11,000 light bulbs picking out the building be extinguished. They'd only had a short love affair, but had made no secret of being close, and much of the public seemed to accept Diana and Dodi were very much a couple. He was buried within 24 hours in accordance with Muslim tradition. After a service at Regent's Park Mosque, his body was taken first to a cemetery in Surrey. Later, he'd be buried not far away at his father's home. Mohammed Al Fayed's grief was combined with a blazing determination to see the prosecution of the photographers he considered responsible for the crash. 7 of them had been arrested in Paris. Even though they denied misbehavior at the crash scene, the paparazzi were condemned by almost everyone. As the French legal investigation started, the uncomfortable truth had to be faced. Without the public appetite for the stories, there'd be no market for the pictures that the photographers relentlessly pursued. The chase was never-ending, the potential rewards for any photographer who got lucky enormous. Princess Diana was the major prize, but stars like Liz Taylor knew all about the ordeal.
And I know what it's like to be chased in a car by the paparazzi. And it's one of the most frightening, claustrophobic making feelings in the world, because you have no place to go. You're in a car, you're going faster and faster to try and get away from them. They can shoot through darkened windows, and you end up in a corner of the car. And she must have known such fear. It makes me so angry.
Suddenly, though, the blame shifted. The chauffeur became the story. Not only speed, but now we discovered drink had played its terrible part in Diana's death. The Ritz's security cameras showed the chauffeur, Henri Paul, on his way to the Mercedes for the last drive, Diana and Dodi with him. Using a rear exit to try to avoid photographers, they were about to entrust themselves to a man 3 times over the limit who'd also taken antidepressant drugs, a driver totally unfit to drive. It had been an awful thought that the paparazzi, hot on the chase, had caused the crash which only the bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones had survived. The new facts were harder to cope with. Diana had got into a car with a drunk driver. Dodi had ordered him to drive fast, and neither Diana nor Dodi had been wearing seatbelts, which might have saved their lives. The more we found out, the more senseless the tragedy became. The grief and the need to express it took the most modern form. Buckingham Palace is on the internet, the electronic global village, and its website was inundated. From all over the world there were 600,000 messages of condolence amid 35 million visits to the site in the fortnight after the accident. A computer message takes a few moments, but many were prepared to sacrifice hours to sign books of condolence at St. James's Palace.
The queue was endless. So I thought, well, I left my bunch of flowers there amongst all the others, and I thought, oh, I'll queue for an hour or two. But I just had to keep queuing and queuing and queuing. I just couldn't get off that queue. I just felt I had to be there till the very end, kind of the end.
The atmosphere from that week, people were kinder to each other. They were giving. While I was queuing up, people were coming around and said, would you like a sweet, would you like an apple, would you like a sandwich? Oh, why can't people be like that all the time?
We queued from 1:30 until 11 o'clock that morning. You know, you just slowly, the queue was going so slow. Exactly 11 o'clock, we got in to sign the book of condolence. And you just sit there and you just don't know what to write. You've waited so long, and you just get there and just don't know what to say.
Overseas, British embassies had streams of callers too, among them the leaders of the world. The Prime Minister of Japan was one. King Hussein of Jordan, another. It wasn't just to embassies and palaces they came, but to places that the princess herself knew well, places like Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. Here, in the chapel, they now have 7 books of condolence, with at least 3,000 messages expressing personal loss and the hope that Diana is now at peace.
On your own, slide. Days and nights are long. You think you've had too much. The slide to hang on.
Intense emotion produces strange effects. Something distinctly odd was reported in St James's Palace.
This woman charged towards me and said, "Are you a journalist? I've got something to tell you. I've seen a vision of Diana. Diana's in there." And then gave this very precise account of how there was an oil portrait at the back of the room where the books of condolence were, and in the top right-hand corner she'd seen an image of Diana. And the stream continued, and there must have been 15 people who came out and gave independent accounts.
Amid all the emotion, the public mourning, a real air of crisis began to develop around the royal family, the absent royal family. An empty Buckingham Palace flagpole stirred up fury. Because the monarch was away, no flag flew. But why couldn't these people follow the rest of the country's example and fly a flag at half-mast? By Wednesday, the press was beginning to agitate. Remoteness, protocol, stuffy tradition, and inability to gauge the public mood were beginning to do the royal family serious damage. These lilies, delivered to the chapel of Great Ormond Street Hospital, so much associated with Diana, were the first sign that one senior royal, the Prince of Wales, appreciated that a response was called for. His name was on the card, along with William and Harry. A man whose keen judgment of public mood had propelled him to Downing Street had started regular discussions with Charles. They were of one mind. Old-fashioned caution and objections had to be swept aside. A significant sign of that, on the Wednesday afternoon I talked to Charles's press secretary, the first time she'd been allowed to give a TV interview. There is some suggestion that protocol is somehow getting in the way a bit. For example, there is no flag flying over Buckingham Palace. Could it not have been arranged that members of the royal family returned to London earlier, at least some of them?
All I can say is that at a time when you lose a member of the family, I think you want to be at home with the family, and that's where the royal family are at the moment, at home in Balmoral with each other.
Preparations for Saturday's funeral were now well underway. Buckingham Palace had promised a unique funeral for a unique person. Detailed plans for royal funerals existed, but not for someone who was no longer quite royal. However, ignoring what some in the Queen's circle thought, Tony Blair and Prince Charles found more common ground, that for the funeral, protocol would take second place to a huge national occasion. At Charles's specific request, the funeral route was greatly extended. It would start from Kensington Palace, rather than St James's Palace, doubling the distance to let many more see the cortege pass. But it didn't stop the criticism. On Thursday came some of the most scathing headlines of the Queen's reign. The row about the flag that didn't fly wouldn't go away. The tone was turning distinctly hostile.
There were accusations of media hype, that we in broadcasting and the newspapers whipped up public hysteria by exaggerating private sorrow and shock. Were we guilty of it? I don't think so. We were constantly taken by surprise at the strength of emotions, and like other reporters, I myself heard here on the streets complaints that the royal family appeared to care so little.
I felt at the time they'd behaved badly. I was waiting for a public statement from the Queen to say how they felt. I mean, I've since read that they wanted to be with the princes and comfort the princes. I can understand that now, but at the time I was very angry. I wanted to see the flag come down half-mast in the week, and I wanted the royals to say how they felt, because they must have all known how we felt by then.
I think they all ought to have come down to London straight away. I mean, it was said that they were in Balmoral with their, privacy and grief and things like that. Well, they wouldn't have had to come out of Buckingham Palace. If they'd come down, it would have showed us that they cared a bit more.
There's a lot of rewriting of history going on, saying nobody was really criticising the royal family at the time. Nobody was particularly angry about issues like the flag and the fact that the royal family didn't make an early statement and talk about it. This is all got up by the media. Well, it wasn't all got up by the media at all. This was an accurate reflection of what people were saying and thinking on the streets. They were acting in a way which flabbergasted me initially, and if anything, we were toning down the things that were being said on the streets. I actually went through copy at one point, removing a couple of phrases about the royal family because I thought they were so over the top.
Tony Blair came marching to the rescue, backed up by the publicity machine run by his press secretary Alistair Campbell, in the centre here, finger on lips. The Prime Minister talked first about the funeral plans.
All our energies are now directed towards trying to make this as tremendous a commemoration of Princess Diana as possible, to make sure that we involve as many people as possible so that we can express our own sense not just of national loss, of personal loss, because I think people feel a personal loss themselves, and make it a service and event of which she would have been proud. And I know that those are very strongly the feelings of the royal family as well, who are trying to cope with a tremendously difficult situation. They're trying to make all the practical arrangements, which are very complex, obviously, for the funeral, at the same time as comforting the two boys. And they share our grief very much, and we should respect that.
The pressure produced another unlikely development. The Queen's own press secretary, who'd never appeared on TV before, surprised the broadcasters by appearing in a studio set up outside Buckingham Palace.
The Queen has asked me to say that the royal family have been hurt by suggestions that they are indifferent to the country's sorrow at the tragic death of the Princess of Wales. The Princess was a much-loved national figure, but she was also a mother whose sons miss her deeply. Prince William and Prince Harry themselves want to be with their father and grandparents at this time in the quiet haven of Balmoral. As their grandmother, the Queen is helping the princes to come to terms with their loss as they prepare themselves for the public ordeal of mourning their mother with the nation on Saturday.
Oddly, Crawford had only just got back to London. He'd been on holiday in Australia. Media professionals were mystified why he hadn't been rushed back a lot sooner. Finally, on Thursday afternoon, the Queen and her family appeared outside Balmoral. They got their first sight of the sort of messages and flowers that had been laid in many different places. Their first sight of what the people thought. The Queen's emotions were hard to read. For Prince Charles, the start of the hard, often heartbreaking job of being a single parent to boys who'd lost their mother. All were concerned for William and Harry, but the family knew that however daunting the ordeal, the world had to be shown that they were caring and suffering too. That same Thursday afternoon, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward appeared in the Mall, the first senior royals to come face to face with the crowds. Early in the week, senior police officers had been worried that when Charles went to the funeral, he could be booed, hissed, or even worse.
Nice to see you, sir. Nice to meet you.
The reception, as the princes made for Buckingham Palace, was friendly. The experiment in testing reaction had worked. The mood, so anti-royal for 4 days, was shifting. The two crossed the courtyard. Royals were, at last, at the palace. And the crowds were told they would hear direct from the Queen. She would speak the following evening. At Westminster Abbey, the funeral service was taking shape. There were disagreements about what should be done, said, and even sung, little different to the experiences of other divided families dealing with an unexpected death. The added problem, nothing like this funeral had ever been put together before.
Well, it's not a royal funeral, it's a funeral of a private person set in a royal context, and it's the borderline between a state royal occasion and a sort of national overwhelming sense by so many people that they were her friends, that it's got to be both private and public and unique in that sense.
private and public, traditional and modern. The music would be as classical as Verdi, as up-to-date as Elton John. Friends, celebrities, charities. The guests will be drawn from a princess's Christmas card list.
This is one of the nicest British invasions that the White House has ever had.
Life is mostly froth and bubble. Two things stand like stone: kindness in another's trouble, courage in your own.
On Friday, the day before Diana's funeral, the royal family set off from Balmoral for London. They flew down. The pressure of public opinion had been felt. They had been due to return later by rail. The Queen and Prince Philip headed for Buckingham Palace. No one could be sure what would happen when they got there. They had decided it was time to face the crowds, to answer all those who had wondered so loudly why the Queen wasn't in London, sharing the people's feelings. The famous palace flagpole was still bare. Royal precedent dictates that when the Queen is in the palace, only her royal standard is flown, and always at full mast. It appeared there now, but sticking at half-mast. Was the people's will somehow being expressed? No, protocol applied, as usual. Almost all formality was forgotten, though, when Charles and his sons went to Diana's home. The public reached out to them.
Charles. Charles.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Howard. Sorry. William. William.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
William. William.
There would be few more poignant moments than these in the gardens of Kensington Palace on Friday afternoon. The same bewildering day, inside St. James's Palace, the Queen saw where the books of condolence were being signed, 43 of them eventually, and met some of those who'd waited for so many hours, and some who were still waiting.
When I realised she was heading towards me, I sort of panicked a bit. She asked how long I'd been there, and I said about 9 or 10 hours. And she asked me where I'd come from, and I said Bow in East London. And she apologised for keeping us waiting, and I said, well, I'd have waited all week if necessary. I asked her if she would except a red rose that I bought for Diana. I'd actually bought her 6. I thought, well, I'm sure Diana wouldn't mind if I had 5, because I had candle as well, and she said, yes, that would be very nice. So I tried to get out of the bag, and it all fell apart because I had no water. And she smiled and said it was very kind of me, thanked me, and off she went.
If sympathies were beginning to run the royal family's way, the Queen's biggest test was about to come. Her live broadcast was on Friday evening at 6 o'clock, a monarch much attacked, addressing literally the world. The speech could have been filmed in a quiet, elegant room, the way royal broadcasts are usually done. Instead, it will be just inside the palace's famous balcony. The crowds thronging the railings outside could be both seen behind the Queen and heard.
So what I say to you now, as your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart. First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness. I admired and respected her for her energy and commitment to others, and especially for her devotion to her 2 boys. This week at Balmoral, we have all been trying to help William and Harry come to terms with the devastating loss that they and the rest of us have suffered. No one who knew Diana will ever forget her. Millions of others who never met her, but felt they knew her, will remember her. I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death. I share in your determination to cherish her memory.
She sounded very sincere, and she looked as though she was very moved, and I think that will satisfy everyone.
I thought she said everything she should have said. Can't think of anything that she left out at all.
I just think it's a pity that the media and everyone else has forced her to stand in front of the cameras and make a speech to satisfy the public.
It was from the heart, and I think she was feeling emotion there, but I think it should have been a bit earlier.
As a tumultuous week drew to a close, London was filling up with those intending to see the funeral for themselves. Much of normal life appeared to be suspended. Shops did much less business than usual. Doctors reported far fewer cases of depression and stress. Mourning the Princess helped release all sorts of emotions.
There were many unusual effects of that week. Crime across the country was down. Fewer holidays were sold than usual, and estate agents sat twiddling their thumbs. No one wanted to go house hunting. And people spent longer on the phone, especially on foreign calls. Families felt they wanted more time to talk.
In the darkness of the Friday evening, some of the most haunting images of the week. Diana's coffin was taken from St. James's Palace to Kensington Palace, where the funeral procession would begin. It was the most dramatic rehearsal imaginable for the next morning. Not since Diana's wedding had London seen anything like it, the capital turning into a giant campsite.
It's unique. I've never experienced a mood like this. I've been to many incidents with the Salvation Army vehicle, but this is absolutely unique. You have strangers who are friends within minutes. The atmosphere is so pleasant towards each other. They're doing things like letting people out the queue and back in again 5 minutes later. It's absolutely unique.
The night before the funeral, we walked down to the Mall and you could just stand up and watch people and admire them for just camping out, and the stillness, the quietness, and you could just, I think you could have talked to anyone. You weren't afraid.
Everybody showed their emotions, you know, crying or talking to each other, not saying a thing maybe, but you just felt like, you know, the person next to you was your friend. You know, we're all kind of friends, which I never experienced before in London.
It was almost as if you had a personal loss. This was the extraordinary thing. It wasn't just a sad occasion, but it's almost if you had a personal family loss.
Make me a channel of your peace, where there is hatred, let me bring your love, where there is injury, your pardon, Lord, and where there's doubt, true faith in you. Make me a channel of your peace. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in giving to all men that we receive. And dying that we are born to eternal life.
The day of Diana's funeral dawned clear, bright, still. Many had spent the night trying to sleep. The police needed to get barriers into their final positions. No one was sure how big the crowds would be. 5 million had been mentioned.
We were as much in the dark as everybody else because we weren't quite sure how many were going to come. As a consequence, we planned for really large numbers. And so we put out in excess of 19 miles of crowd control barriers. We used several thousand police officers. All had to be brought into London, you know, sort of early in the morning and fed. So logistically, it was a huge operation, and everybody did really well, I think.
An unusual operation too. The last-minute preparations included removing traffic lights to let the gun carriage bearing the coffin get round a corner. Giant screens went up in Hyde Park to show the Abbey service. 2.5 billion would watch on TV worldwide. A vast audience, but a time too for individual thoughts.
I sat looking up at the flags on the Abbey there last night, and it sort of just gave you a feeling of tranquility, and yet the feeling that it seems so unreal that she's really gone, that they're going to bring her through here, and just doesn't, no.
The stage was set. The funeral was about to begin. Kensington Palace, just after 9 o'clock on the morning of Princess Diana's funeral. The crowd had fallen almost completely silent. Men from the Welsh Guards were chosen to be the pallbearers, 8 to carry the coffin, with a drill sergeant and an officer.
We marched down and formed up outside the door of the flat there, and the chaplain appeared, and the coffin came out, and there were the flowers obviously, and the card from the princess on the top of it, and some prayers were said, and it was very quiet and just us really and the King's Troop, and actually quite a cold morning, and you could hear the sort of jangling of the brasses and so on. It's actually extremely, you know, atmospheric. As we turned out of the driveway of Kensington Palace, that was the first time that we actually came across the public. And I think my only way to describe it is the whole thing was just quite extraordinary. I mean, there were people sort of wailing and crying and shouting Diana and throwing flowers. And our first concern was that the horses might play up with flowers hitting them, and the second one was that we'd get our bearskins knocked off. And all of this sort of overlaid this extraordinary public reaction, which was in a way a bit unnerving, really, because it didn't seem to be a very sort of British thing to do.
At Westminster Abbey, the congregation was arriving, famous faces from across the world. Outside Buckingham Palace, the royal family waited. More mourners: Mohammed Al Fayed, the opera singer Pavarotti, Elton John, George Michael. A woman so identified with peaceful causes was being taken the royal way to the Abbey on a gun carriage. 7 days after Diana's death, the Queen and her family joined the people on the streets to pay their collective respects. As they left for the Abbey, up above the palace, a Union flag was flown at half-mast. So many had wanted to see it. The Prime Minister, with his wife, was at the Abbey to read the lesson. At St James's Palace, Diana's sons, with Prince Charles and Earl Spencer, prepared to walk behind the coffin. At 76, Prince Philip would as well, and behind them 500 people from many charities.
I was pushing Melissa in her wheelchair. Her feet are always very badly blistered and she can't walk very far, so she needs the wheelchair. Prince Philip was standing next to Prince William, and his hands kept going up to the middle of Prince William's back and patting him on the back. And he constantly spoke to him as if to reassure him, and I thought that was quite touching. He seemed to be keeping William sort of up and together so that he could get through it. And I did feel like crying, but I really tried hard not to do it, because I thought if her sons were being brave and were walking in front of us and taking part in that procession and they weren't breaking down, then we shouldn't either. We were very conscious of not making a mistake or doing anything wrong, and we were obviously very proud to be there, to be just behind the princes.
It was overawing, really. It was as if it wasn't real. We were there, standing right at the front, directly opposite us. There were TV news cameras from throughout the world with satellite dishes up, and we obviously realised that it was a world event that we were taking part in. And there was a slight breeze, and every now and again, as you walked along, perfume from the flowers drifted across us, and it made me shudder, as if something cold had gone across me, although the sun was out and it was very warm.
As the procession passed under Horse Guards Arch, a quick reassuring touch from Earl Spencer for Harry and from Prince Philip for William. At 11 o'clock, the Welsh Guardsmen carried their precious burden gingerly into the Abbey.
It was English oak, lead-lined, and I think probably because it was originally meant to go into the crypt, and therefore had to be a coffin capable of, you know, sort of lasting for centuries. And I don't actually know what the real weight was, but I mean, we've heard sort of estimates of 45 stone. I know definitely from picking it up and seeing the boys struggling with it, it was certainly of that order, because they're not small lads and they struggled.
I can speak for like all the boys it was, and the actual emotions, you can actually feel them from all the crowds, and actually doing a kind of duty like we did with the coffin. I hope we did a grand job for the public and for Princess Diana ourselves.
We are gathered here in Westminster Abbey to give thanks for the life of Diana, Princess of Wales, to commend her soul to Almighty God, and to seek his comfort for all who mourn. We particularly pray for God's restoring peace and loving presence with her children, the Princes William and Harry, and all her family.
Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not love, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, and have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not love, it profiteth me nothing.
Will always
After Elton John, the princess's brother, Earl Spencer.
I stand before you today, the representative of a family in grief, in a country in mourning, before a world in shock. Diana was the very essence of compassion, of duty, of style, of beauty. All over the world, she was a symbol of selfless humanity, a standard bearer for the rights of the truly downtrodden, a very British girl who transcended nationality, someone with a natural nobility who was classless, and who proved in the last year that she needed no royal title to continue to generate her particular brand of magic. There is no doubt that she was looking for a new direction in her life at this time. She talked endlessly of getting away from England, mainly because of the treatment that she received at the hands of the newspapers. I don't think she ever understood why her genuinely good intentions were sneered at by the media, why there appeared to be a permanent quest on their behalf to bring her down. It is baffling. My own and only explanation is that genuine goodness is threatening to those at the opposite end of the moral spectrum. It is a point to remember that of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this: a girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person of the modern age. She would want us today to pledge ourselves to protecting her beloved boys, William and Harry, from a similar fate. And I do this here, Diana, on your behalf. We will not allow them to suffer the anguish that used regularly to drive you to tearful despair. And beyond that, on behalf of your mother and sisters, I pledge that we, your blood family, will do all we can to continue the imaginative and loving way in which you are steering these two exceptional young men, so that their souls are not simply immersed by duty and tradition, but can sing openly as you planned. We fully respect the heritage into which they have both been born, and will always respect and encourage them in their royal role. But we, like you, recognize the need for them to experience as many different aspects of life as possible, to arm them spiritually and emotionally for the years ahead. I know you would have expected nothing less from us. William and Harry, we all care desperately for you today. We're all chewed up with sadness at the loss of a woman who wasn't even our mother. How great your suffering is, we cannot even imagine. I would like to end by thanking God for the small mercies he's shown us at this dreadful time, for taking Diana at her most beautiful and radiant, and when she had joy in her private life. Above all, we give thanks for the life of a woman I'm so proud to be able to call my sister, the unique, the complex, the extraordinary and irreplaceable Diana, whose beauty, both internal and external, will never be extinguished from our minds.
A tide of emotion shattered the respectful silence. It was time for Diana's coffin to leave the Abbey.
then all that you could hear overlying that was the creak of the soldiers' boots as they went down the abbey. It was actually an extremely sort of atmospheric and emotional moment, and I think that probably is the single thing of the whole episode that will stay with me. It was very emotional for us. You just had to grin and bear it. And when I actually was marching down to the, when we picked the coffin up and we were marching down and we come to a halt on Winston Churchill's memorial stone, I actually had a quick glance over to look at Pavarotti, and he was in a hell of a state, and I really felt for him.
Across the country, silence in Diana's memory. The service over, Diana's body would be taken by hearse the 77 miles to her resting place in Northamptonshire. It was the saddest of duties for one of the police outriders who'd once been among the princess's bodyguards.
I think one of my fondest memories of her will be was when the boys were quite young. They used to jump on the bikes and we used to ride them round inside Kensington Palace, and having just given Harry a ride round the circle on the bike, she stepped up and said, "It's Mummy's turn," and that was one of my favourite recollections of her. That was the sort of free spirit that she was, really. Up through Finchley, the crowds were at their thickest, and I was getting a bit concerned that the people in front of us weren't going to be able to move back because of the crowds pushing forward behind. But it was just like the parting of the waves. They just parted and we moved through. One of the things that, as we set out, people started to throw flowers onto the road. For a while I was trying to avoid them because these were individual tributes by various people, but it quickly became obvious that there was no way we could avoid riding over these flowers because the road was just covered. And as people saw the flower tributes become numerous, so numerous in fact that a decision was made at the bottom of the M1 that we were going to have to stop because the driver just could not see. And we cleared the flowers and then proceeded on. There was a decision made not to shut the motorway, totally unnecessary because the motorway shut itself. Vehicles were stopped on the southbound carriageway and people standing in the central reservation. All the bridges were covered, the embankments were covered, every vantage point was covered with people 5, 6, 7 deep. It's an experience and a ride that I will never forget. And that was like that all the way there.
The gates of Althorpe. The cameras got no further. There was a private burial service inside the Spencer estate. Her brother decided that to prevent the family chapel being overrun by visitors, Diana will be buried on an island in Althorpe Parks Lake. There, as one newspaper wrote, she will face the rising sun forever. In the years ahead, people will come to this place, to Althorpe, to pay tribute to the princess, to remember her. It's now exactly 4 months since she died, far too soon to be sure how history will judge her. But the impact of her life will certainly be felt, the monarchy won't be the same, and the work of her charities will be boosted enormously by the Diana Memorial Fund. The impact of her death was astonishing.
It's as if an atomic bomb has been dropped in this country from the point of view of old traditions, and I'm not saying for 1 minute we should sweep away old traditions, but I think it's shaken everybody much more than people think.
It's made the monarchy think that they've got to listen to the people. I'm sure they were shocked by the public outpouring from the whole world. I really am. I don't think anybody expected the grief to be that strong.
I think because they were so stunned by the reaction of the people, I think that they've decided now to look at things and be more approachable.
A more relaxed monarchy is already with us. Prince Charles accepts and welcomes new thinking. William and Harry have been brought up to know more of ordinary life than previous young royals. Diana made sure that they knew different princes for a different world. The Queen herself said after Diana the monarchy would have to learn lessons, would have to listen. In death, as in life, Diana is influencing and changing the institution she distrusted so much. On her golden wedding day in November, the Queen took delight as the crowd in London offered their congratulations. But it's hard to forget another younger face that seemed to charm almost everyone.
Goodbye.